Just 12 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, I stopped by my sister's house to drop off something she'd forgotten for the wedding. I never knocked. I'd been walking into her home for years. But before I reached the living room, I heard my name, followed by my fiancé's. I froze outside the hallway as my sister laughed and said something that made my entire body go numb. Then my mother answered with words I will never forget. In that moment, my wedding wasn't falling apart. It had already been destroyed long before I ever found out. My name is Emma Carter, and I'm 29 years old. For the last 8 years, I've served as a logistics officer in the U.S. Army. Planning missions under pressure had become second nature to me. I believed I'd seen every kind of challenge life could throw my way. I was wrong. 12 hours before my wedding, I still believed I was the luckiest woman alive. After returning from my final deployment 6 months earlier, I had finally started planning a future outside the military. Marrying Daniel felt like the beginning of that new chapter. We'd been together for 3 years, and despite the long deployments and endless distance, he'd always convinced me we were strong enough to survive anything. My older sister, Olivia, had been my biggest supporter, or at least that's what I believed. She had helped choose my wedding dress, organized my bridal shower, and insisted on handling dozens of last-minute details. My parents couldn't stop talking about how proud they were that our family would finally celebrate something joyful after years of military deployments and missed holidays. Around 8 that evening, Olivia called saying she'd accidentally left one of the custom family photo albums at her house. It was supposed to be displayed at the reception the next morning. I'll bring it over, I told her. It's open. Just come in, she replied casually. I'd walked into her house without knocking hundreds of times before. Nothing about that night felt unusual. I parked outside, grabbed the empty keepsake box from my passenger seat, and let myself inside through the unlocked front door. The house was quiet except for voices drifting from the hallway. I smiled. They were probably making another surprise for the wedding. As I walked toward the living room, I heard my mother laugh. Then she said my name. I stopped. Emma never questions anything, she said. She's always trusted this family. Olivia answered with a quiet laugh. That's exactly why tomorrow has to happen. My stomach tightened.
Dad spoke next.
Once she's married, everything stays exactly where it belongs. I frowned. What did that even mean? Then Olivia lowered her voice. I told Daniel we can't keep pretending much longer. He hates sneaking around. My entire body went cold. Mom answered almost immediately. He only has to keep pretending until after the wedding. Silence filled my ears. I couldn't breathe. The man I was marrying and my own sister? Neither of them knew I was standing just outside the hallway, hearing every word that would destroy the life I thought I was about to begin. I quietly stepped backward, opened the front door without making a sound, and walked into the night. I wasn't going to cancel the wedding. Not yet. First, I needed the whole truth. I didn't drive home right away. Instead, I pulled into the empty parking lot of a 24-hour coffee shop a few miles away. The wedding playlist I'd been listening to only minutes earlier suddenly felt unbearable. I turned off the engine, gripped the steering wheel, and stared through the windshield. For nearly 10 minutes, I simply replayed their words. He only has to keep pretending until after the wedding. Maybe there was another explanation. Maybe I had misunderstood. I wanted to believe that more than anything. But military training had taught me one lesson above all else. Never ignore evidence, because you hope it's wrong. I took out my phone and opened Daniel's social media accounts. At first, everything looked ordinary. Pictures of us, wedding countdown posts, comments about how excited he was. Then I started paying attention to details instead of captions. Almost every business trip he'd claimed to take over the past year matched weekends when Olivia had conveniently been visiting friends. Old restaurant photos showed the same wine glasses. The same hotel artwork appeared in 2 different pictures they had posted months apart. The clues had always been there. I'd simply trusted them too much to notice. I called the only person I knew could help without asking unnecessary questions. Captain Maya Brooks had served beside me for 4 years before transferring into military cyber operations. She answered on the second ring. Emma, aren't you supposed to be getting married tomorrow? I need a favor. Something in my voice made her stop joking. Within 30 minutes, I emailed her screenshots and backup files from my phone. She called back just after midnight. Emma, are you sitting down? My heart sank. They've been communicating through archived cloud backups. They deleted everything from their phones, but not every copy. A minute later, my phone filled with screenshots. Daniel, Olivia, hundreds of messages. After the honeymoon, we'll finally stop hiding. She'll never suspect us. Her military housing benefits will make buying a home so much easier. Just smile through one more day. Each sentence felt heavier than the last. They weren't just having an affair. They had planned to build their future using the life I'd spent years sacrificing to create. I didn't cry. Not anymore. I created a folder labeled evidence, saved every screenshot, every date, every conversation, then uploaded copies to secure cloud storage. When I finished, I called Captain Brooks one last time. "What are you going to do?" she asked quietly. I looked at the wedding invitation lying on the passenger seat. "I'm going to the ceremony, but not as the bride they think is showing up." By sunrise, I had stopped wondering whether the wedding should happen. Now I was deciding how the truth would finally be revealed. The ceremony began exactly on schedule. The chapel looked beautiful. White roses lined the aisle. Soft piano music echoed through the room. Friends, relatives, and fellow service members smiled as I walked toward the front in the wedding dress I'd dreamed about for months. If anyone noticed how calm I looked, they probably assumed it was confidence. It wasn't. It was certainty. Daniel smiled as I reached the altar. "The most beautiful bride I've ever seen," he whispered. For the first time since we'd met, I didn't believe a single word he said. The officiant welcomed everyone before beginning the ceremony. Everything continued normally until he reached the vows. "Do you, Emma, take Daniel?" I gently raised my hand. "I'm sorry," I said politely. "May I have 1 minute before we continue?" The room fell silent. The officiant nodded. I turned to face our guests. Before today, I believed marriage could only succeed if it was built on honesty. Last night, I discovered something that made these vows impossible for me to say. Confused whispers spread through the chapel. Daniel's smile disappeared. "Emma, what are you doing?" he asked quietly. I looked at him, then at my sister sitting proudly in the front row beside our parents. "I spent years serving my country because integrity matters. I can't promise my life to someone who has spent months lying to me." I removed my phone from my bouquet. I hoped I was wrong. The large screen behind the ceremony, prepared for our wedding photos, displayed the screenshots I'd quietly asked the venue technician to load before guests arrived. Message after message appeared. "After the honeymoon, we'll finally stop hiding. She trusts both of us. Just one more day." The room became completely still. Olivia's face lost every trace of color. My mother stood halfway from her seat before sitting back down without saying a word. Daniel opened his mouth. "Emma, I can explain." I calmly shook my head. The messages explain everything. No shouting. No insults. No revenge. Just the truth. I slipped my engagement ring from my finger and placed it in Daniel's hand. "This marriage ends before it begins." Several guests quietly stood and walked toward me. One of my fellow officers placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. Another guest escorted my visibly shaken father outside. No one applauded. No one celebrated. It wasn't that kind of moment. As I walked back down the aisle alone, I realized something unexpected. I hadn't lost my future. I'd escaped a dishonest one. Outside the chapel, the morning sun felt warmer than it had the day before. The wedding was over. But for the first time in 12 hours, I could finally breathe. Sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't saying "I do." Sometimes it's having the strength to walk away before a lifetime of lies begins.